Hello, and welcome to another episode of Extra Literary Affairs. Today, Joey and I will be having yet another affair with Virginia Woolf. And the purpose of our getting together today, Joey, is to dive a little bit deeper into our fascination and love for Virginia Woolf and explore a few topics that we've definitely touched on in the past two episodes where we have discussed her work. And I think it would be really great for us to kick off with just a little bit of biographical information for those who may not have already heard this from us before. But I think it's very clear we both really, really appreciate Virginia Woolf. So I am just going to start off very quickly by saying Virginia Woolf is one of the most influential writers of the 20th century. She left behind a legacy that continues to inspire and challenge readers today. Her works, including Mrs.
hmm
Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, and Orlando, are celebrated for their innovative narrative techniques, profound psychological insights, and explorations of gender and identity. However, Woolf's life was marred by severe bouts of mental illness, culminating in her tragic suicide in March of 1941. This episode is going to delve into her suicide note as well as the underlying psychological conditions that sort of plagued her throughout her life. So, Joey, do you want to talk about mental illness
Yeah.
in the
Uh,
realm of Virginia Woolf?
yes, I will. This is not coming from me because I'm not a professional psychologist or psychiatrist or doctor of any kind. This is actually from the National Center for Biotechnology Information. And we're going to be using different sources today because obviously we don't just have all of this knowledge about Virginia Woolf because we're not biographers of hers. So we'll link all of our sources in the episode note. Virginia Woolf, according to this website, had most likely had bipolar disorder. And it was, well, at least to this website, it was due to childhood trauma, particularly sexual abuse. And it is linked to earlier onset, more severe symptoms and increased suicide attempts in bipolar disorder patients. So Virginia Woolf's life exemplifies this connection because her family had a history of mental illness, including depression and cyclothymia, that's what I'm gonna say, which is a mild mood disorder. I didn't know what that was. And she also endured prolonged sexual abuse by her half brothers, which is very sad. And I did not know that. So Wolf's bipolar disorder followed a neuroprogressive course, worsening over time with frequent hospitalizations, cognitive decline, and suicide attempts. Her first breakdown occurred at 22 after her father's death, and she later attempted suicide multiple times, including a near fatal overdose in 1913. Despite periods of productivity producing masterpieces like Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse, her mental health deteriorated in her final years. She struggled with paranoia, hallucinations, and an inability to write, culminating in her suicide, as you said, in 1941. I guess, they're saying that she had bipolar disorder, and that sort of explains her mental illness that obviously she talked about a lot and wrote about a lot, I mean. And a lot of her characters seem to be suffering from mental illness, whether it's this or something similar.
Yeah, Joey, I appreciate you saying that because when we look at her early life, I believe her mom died when she was 13. So that
hmm
led to obviously some trauma of losing a parent at that teenager age. And her father did remarry. And I believe that the sexual abuse that she encountered happened as a result of obtaining a new stepbrother. And I think that is in the literature. And this podcast is not finger pointing at all. It's not who's to blame for this circumstance. I am fascinated on the backgrounds of writers to see how their personal experience of the world filters into their writing. And as we have explored in other conversations about Virginia Woolf, she also was exploring her sexuality. She did have a long-standing affair with one of her lifelong friends, Vita Sackville West. I always get
Yeah.
the name Vita wrong. I love Vita Sackville West. That was very important to her. And after her death, Vita wrote a really touching letter that I would like to read later to Virginia's husband to offer her condolences for what had happened. And to your point, Joey, that she mentioned in her suicide note, which we will actually read because it's Virginia Woolf. It's even that is beautiful and so singularly her that I was like, I know it seems like a morbid topic, and is that something that we should be discussing? It is in the public domain. People do know about it. She left it. Her husband did not publish the note, but her brother did. And not her
Mm.
bad sex abusing brother, but her other brother.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was just such a beautiful moment to think back on. The last novel that she wrote was The Waves in 1931. And 10 years went by without her producing another major work. And for someone as talented and consumed by her writing as Virginia Woolf, I'm sure that was maddening all in its own right. That the thing that she most loved, she was no longer capable of doing because of the mental illness that was progressing. And I don't know about healthcare back in that time frame in England, but I do
Hmm.
know even people today in my life who have similar diagnoses. It's very difficult to get the mixture just right, to keep everybody on the straight and narrow and keep everything moving forward. So I cannot even begin to comprehend the challenges she had, knowing that there were probably not effective pharmaceutical interventions that she could take. So it's kind of like, well, good luck. Hello, good luck.
Yeah.
This is what's happening. And they probably didn't even call it that. As we know, the definitions and the criteria for several mental health challenges have been changed over the years. So I'm not even sure what they would call it. She herself or the people in her life called them depressive episodes because I don't think anybody was raising the alarm when she was manically writing for, 8 hours a day or 12 hours a day, or this big burst of energy that she was reported to have. It was kind of just the flip side of that. It's like, oh, we love it when you're manic and very productive, but it's really kind of hard to deal with the downside of that, the depression and the severe mood swings.
Yeah, I mean that is so unfortunate that I'm sure that she was just thought of as like a hysterical woman, which is seems like that would probably be something that they would say back in the day, is not really believe that she was struggling, and that's so unfortunate because imagine she was so young when she died. How old was she? She was 40 something.
I think she was 47. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
She was in her
She,
40s.
yeah. So imagine what she would have continued to write was given the proper health care to help her through her mental illness as much as possible.
And Joey, one of the things that I think contributed to this, and I believe that this came out in the novel, which I happen to have right here because I love it so much, The Hours by Michael Cunningham, which is a
Hmm.
companion piece to Mrs. Dalloway. And we all know how I feel about Mrs. Dalloway. So we'll just leave it there. I believe that Michael Cunningham, explores perhaps some of the other things that were happening in her life at that time. And in 1939, that is when the World War II started. So a couple
Hmm.
years before that, but the Blitz, where 43,000 citizens of the UK were murdered as part of the war effort through the bombs, they perished. That started in earnest in September of 1940. So she had many, many months of hearing the bombs, of being in a wartime situation, which, even for the most hardy and mentally adjusted and super well people, I'm sure had to be a terrifying time.
Hmm.
And I think we as a country and a generation have not actively dealt with a wartime ongoing situation on our home turf, so to speak. So I think it's very hard for us to just absorb the enormity of how disruptive and how terrifying and how ambiguous. Like, we don't know. Is this a day? Is this a year? Is this the rest of our lives? I just think that that was so chaotic and so difficult to manage that even if she was doing great, she might not have been great after that. We may have lost
Yeah.
her in another way. Can I be so bold as to say I would love to read her suicide note that she left for her husband before she left her house, walked through their back garden, filled her pockets with rocks, and walked into the river and drowned. This is the suicide note that Leonard found after Virginia left their house. Dearest, I feel certain I am going mad again. I feel we can't go through another of those terrible times, and I shan't recover this time. I begin to hear voices, and I can't concentrate, so I am doing what seems the best thing to do. You have given me the greatest possible happiness. You have been, in every way, all that anyone could be. I don't think two people could have been happier till this terrible disease came. I can't fight any longer. I know that I am spoiling your life, that without me you could work, and you will, I know. You see, I can't even write this properly. I can't read. What I want to say is I owe all the happiness of my life to you. You have been entirely patient with me and incredibly good. I want to say that. Everybody knows it. If anybody could have saved me, it would have been you. Everything has gone from me but the certainty of your goodness. I can't go on spoiling your life any longer. I don't think two people could have been happier than we have been. And she handwrote the note, she folded it up, stuck it in an envelope, and left it for her husband to find. And although that is a tragic note, it also, to me, is so hopeful that she's like, no two people could be happier than we have been. They built a life, they built a publishing empire, they worked on the Bloomsbury Group together. They had all of this vivacious, wonderful, creative energy between them. And yet, mental illness takes no prisoners, right? She just really could not. She could not bear to go on. And something that I learned in reading through additional information about her passing, her body wasn't found for 3 weeks.
Oh man, that's rough.
And so, and I'll read some excerpts from her friends about that fact. And Rita Sackville West was the most poignant about it. And she, when Virginia's body wasn't originally found, she thought, isn't it beautiful that she just disappeared? She wouldn't want the fuss. She wouldn't want you guys to have to deal with the aftermath of what she had done. Maybe she just floated out to the sea. Wouldn't that have been beautiful? And so they were
Mm.
just kind of lingering. And that to me is a plot point that Virginia Woolf herself would have woven into one of her stories, right? Like you can just go back to your element. You can just go back to the water and be reabsorbed into the universe. And
Mm.
when her body was found 3 weeks later, she was still very close to home. And I think it was just very traumatic because then her husband and her sister had to go through all the attendant things to close that chapter of their life. So I just thought that was interesting, just very interesting.
Yeah, that's rough. That's I mean, I did read her suicide note because it is freely available online and I'm sure we will include that link if you want if you want to read it. It's extremely morbid, but beautifully written is as only Virginia Woolf could do. This tragically beautiful note and oh God, I can't imagine. It was probably so devastating, obviously.
And such a surprise, like a surprise, but not a surprise. She had had
Hmm.
previous episodes where things were deteriorating into her life. And I just want to read this little bit because this arrived for Leonard. Leonard, bless him. All I can say is bless Leonard. He handwrote notes to 7 of her closest friends and sent them out before her death was announced, like on the BBC or in the London Times or the Times. And one of those people was Vita Sackville West. And so she wrote back to Leonard, the loveliest mind and spirit I ever knew, immortal both to the world and us who loved her. This is not a hard letter to write, as you will know something of what I feel, and words are unnecessary. For you, I feel a really overwhelming sorrow, and for myself, a loss which can never diminish. And I think that was just such a beautiful, touching encapsulation of how many people felt. There are no words. This loss lingers. And the woman of all the words, right? Virginia Woolf, we talk about her stream of consciousness. We talk about how vibrantly she sees the world. And Joey, I know you and I are both reading The Waves. And as I
Hmm.
was reading The Waves and thinking about what eventually happened to her a decade later, I felt a little bit like a person who might be experiencing mental illness, right? There's all this jumping around, there's this very hyper focused and intensity that these young people, I'm still in the young people phase, in the young people, in the
Okay.
young people phase of just this really, really extreme focus. And dealing with various jealousies and insecurities. And it was such a beautiful portrait of deeply empathizing with those, i.e., all of us, who are imperfect and have struggles that others may not be aware of. And so that was just extra, like extra bonus material for me to think that she could write so beautifully because for herself and those around her, she probably could witness some of these things unspooling. And when she was on and really focused and able to write, she could capture that energy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've read 5 books of hers this year, which feels like why am I reading them so fast, I guess. But I think she had, if I'm not mistaken, 8 full-length novels that she published during her lifetime that list like that I'm pretty sure. Let me double check. I'm
Can I
pretty sure it's
read to you the
eight.
ones that the major ones? Can I just
Yes,
do those?
maybe I
So
mean the major ones then.
yeah,
Okay, go
so
ahead.
Mrs. Dalloway from 1925, To the Lighthouse in 1927, Orlando in 1928, A Room of One's Own in 1929, and
Hmm.
The Waves in 1931. But Jacob's Room is missing from this list, so I think my
Yeah,
list is
here's
not
the
great.
I'll tell you the other ones. Okay, so The Voyage Out is her first one in 1915. Night and Day, which was 1919. Jacob's Room, the missing one, in 1922. And did you say Between the Acts? Because that's her last
No,
published. You said the years though, right? I think.
I did
Okay, okay.
say the
I
years.
can't remember all of those titles you said. Okay, so Between the Acts is her last published novel, full-length novel which was published in 1941.
Oh,
So
that's
that's one, two,
interesting,
three,
Joey.
four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. There was nine, sorry.
So my theory that she didn't publish anything for 10 years is incorrect. She had a bit of a hiatus in her publishing because apparently her last book was published in the year of her death. So I think that's also
Yeah,
very
the waves and
interesting.
the years were published 6 years apart, and then the years and between the acts were 3 and 1. Okay, so that's four. Four. I had to do math. And that sucks for me. But okay, so I've read, I don't know why I'm reading them all so fast, but my plan is to read them all this year. I don't know. Now I've put it out there, so I'm going to do it. But I think you can really tell that Virginia Woolf had spent a lot of her time sitting and observing herself and her thoughts and spending a lot of time in her own head, which whether that is because she was struggling with bipolar disorder or whatever other mental illnesses that she possibly could have been suffering from. I'm sure she had anxiety. I mean, who doesn't? But you can tell that there was a lot of introspection, like that is not normal. Like, not to say that she was abnormal, but
It's
to
an
say that,
advanced level of introspection because I'm
yes.
like, introspection is not a mental disorder. It is a
No, no, no. I didn't mean
superpower.
that was,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I didn't mean that was a mental disorder. That's not. Everyone should be introspective. A lot of people are not. I think that's her problem. But I think you can tell that she spent a lot of time doing that and trying to figure out, well, I mean, that's part of how she practiced her craft of stream of consciousness, which I want to talk a little bit more about stream of consciousness later, that she spent a lot of time trying to figure out like what does this mean to me? What does this look like? How can I interpret these things around me? And not only herself, but she's observing a lot of people, like in the waves in particular, since we are reading that, which this is why, by the way, this is why we're doing this, because our next episode will be a discussion about the waves. So if you want to read that, read it now. And uh, I think In the Waves is a good example of how easily she can jump in between different perspectives because there's 6 main characters. There's kind of seven. There's kind of seven if you count Percival, even though he doesn't talk. But you can see how easily she can jump in between all of these different characters with all these different emotions and motivations and aspirations in life. and they feel like completely real people. Even though I think maybe in the beginning when they're kids, and you're like, kids don't think like this. This is not what a kid. This is Virginia Woolf here. Okay, that's the only part that I'm like, I don't buy this yet. I did. It's beautifully written, obviously, but it's definitely from an adult's perspective because children do not think quite. They're not that articulate yet. So, but yeah, it's interesting how we can tie a lot of her life back to her actual work, and whether she meant to incorporate it to that extent, I don't know. But that happens with a lot of writers where they're like, I don't want anything in my life and my work, and you're like, well, it's too bad. Like Sally Rooney's a good example of that, where she's like, I don't want to put myself in my writing. And you're like, I think you did. I don't know. You didn't mean to, but I can see it.
Joey, I would
Oh, okay.
love to hear more about her early career with the Bloomsbury Group and how that started and possibly influenced the way in which she approached her writing.
So for whatever reason, I thought that James Joyce was in the Bloomsbury group, but he was not. At least I have not seen anything. He was not mentioned, and he certainly would have been mentioned. I don't know why. Maybe I'm thinking about like because
He
the guy's name
called
is
his
Bloom.
character right?
Yeah.
Harold Bloom. So I was like, yeah, he's got to be in this. I'm like, no, not.
Yeah, no. I also was just like I swear he would be in this. But anyway, so the
Not
Blooms
invited. He was so not
yeah.
invited.
And I think I know why, and I will get to that. But the Bloomsbury Group was an informal circle of friends who championed gender and sexual equality, rational debate, and the arts. Though none identified with the name, the group included influential 20th century figures like E.M. Forster, who I did know was in it, and Virginia Woolf, artist Vanessa Bell, and painter Duncan Grant. Don't know who those people are, but I will have to look up their work.
Vanessa Bell is Virginia's sister. A hundred
Oh,
percent. I know
and
that
her
for
husband
real.
was in it. So
And yes,
look at that.
Leonard Wolf was also one of the founding members there.
So, or originating from friendships at Cambridge University, male members such as Toby, or I'm assuming it's Toby Stephen, Leonard Wolf, her husband, Linton Strachey. I had to look at people's names. And
And
Clive
I
Bell.
think Toby was one of her brothers.
Well, if her last name was Bell, oh, maybe this is one of her step brothers then? Okay, makes sense. And Clive Bell formed the group's core. Many joined the Intellectual Apostle Society, fostering a culture of debate that became central to Bloomsbury's dynamic. Though not an official movement, the group had a profound cultural impact reshaping literature, art, and politics. Despite their middle-class background, they rejected Victorian conventions, advocating personal freedom and equality. Critics dismissed them as elitists, yet their influence was undeniable. Stephen Spender, I don't know who that is, it's called the most creative force in English culture between the world wars. And Virginia Woolf is said to be the group's most famous member. Although E.M. Forster, I don't know, maybe Virginia Woolf is more famous than he is. She's more of a household name. Like you've probably heard of Virginia Woolf, even if you've never read anything by her, but you probably wouldn't know who E.M. Forster was unless you read something.
I did not know who Ann Forrester was until you and another one of our colleagues had
Really?
mentioned it a lot. And it was like, who is this person and why do you keep mentioning him? And as we learned more about his ideas about writing and effective storytelling, it's like, oh, okay, I see where this goes. And E.M. Forster was very much a part of her social circle, and he also did send a condolence letter to her husband, which was beautifully written. And I was saying to myself, today, you know, everyone will have a passing at some point, right? That's just a fact of life. But
Hmm.
isn't it wonderful to be surrounded by eloquent writers who can provide these beautiful words of comfort to those who are left behind? So I was just really moved by, of course, your famous writing friends write the exact right thing. And it was very interesting. Several of the people that you mentioned were sending these notes to Leonard, and some of them are like, I think E.M. Forrester said, and I'm pretty sure it was him, he was like, I am too bereft right now to think of anyone other than myself. So I'm going to sit with that and I will write you
That's
a
fair.
proper letter in a couple of days. And then another woman wrote to her, and I don't remember who it was, but we will put a link in the show notes because there is a beautiful, beautiful article by the Marginalia website that has all of these documents available. And
Hmm.
it was a female friend who said, I can't do anything but think about you and how you're doing. I will put myself aside. I am not important. So I just thought it was also this very interesting thing that someone collected all of these condolence letters and put them together and just seeing how differently people who were very intimately involved in her life and her writing responded. But they all felt, these people are being exactly who they are. And I really do appreciate that. No one was putting on airs. It's like, hey, I have to focus on me right now. And the other person's like, hey, I can't even think about how this impacts me. I am just going to think about you and Vanessa and her immediate family.
That's funny that Ian Forster was like, listen, I gotta be honest, I can't. I'm too upset. I can't think about anybody else outside my own devastation. Which valid, sir, valid. That's okay to say. It's like I'm coming for you. Don't worry. I'm gonna,
I'll get back to
I'm
you on that.
coming to
I'll get back
comfort
to
you,
you.
but I need some comfort first because I'm no use to you now. So fair. At least he was honest. But I think as I was looking more into the Bloomsbury Group, it seems like their maybe not their sole intention, but they just happen to be attracting people of various sexualities, and it seemed like that was sort of the uniting factor for them. I don't know that all of them were. I didn't see anything about her husband, Leonard Wolf, being somewhere on the queer spectrum, but certainly Virginia Woolf was, as you said, with her relationship with Vita Sackville West. This one article I read by Varsity, which I will link in the episode notes, that they're labeling her as bisexual. I don't think that's true. I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying she's not, but I think you're maybe don't put a label on someone that could not label themselves. But I would say maybe she was somewhere on the queer spectrum, but who knows if she was bisexual. She could have been pansexual or demisexual. She could have been, there's so many different sexualities that we have language for now. So maybe let's not say that she's bisexual unless she said it. And I don't think she did. I
I
didn't see
don't
anything
know
like
if
that.
there, yeah, and Joey, I
I
think
don't
you
know. Yeah, and the language probably didn't
the
exist yet.
language just wasn't there. She did acknowledge her deep and profound love for her husband. And we don't know
Hmm.
if that was romantic, intellectual, emotional, sexual love. Like she doesn't put those gradations in there, but she clearly profoundly loved her husband, who was such an inspiration and help to her in her life. But she did really have that passionate and creative time with Vita Sackville West. So it is not an open question as to whether that
Hmm.
happened. I think you are very astute in saying we're not going to put any of our modern labels on what those relationships should be called.
Yeah, I think this article's point was talking about bisexual erasure, which is a thing. If you did not know,
I
if you
don't
didn't
know
know.
what does that even mean?
Oh,
Like
okay.
you
It's
can't be
sort of
bisexual? You have to pick a different name?
no, it's not that you have to pick a different name. It's just the idea that you're like no one people will say like oh bisexuals don't really exist like you're either gay or you're straight. And so
Huh.
there was yeah, like I think it will. I'm not saying that's true. It's not true. There are people who are obviously bisexual, and that's you're valid. Don't worry, bisexuals. I'm not erasing you. I swear.
And
And
Joey,
so,
I'm laughing at that concept because I also have had people in and out of my life in my long life experience that also were categorized themselves as bisexual. And it was also one of those things I like the term, I think when you said it's pansexual means, and
mm,
I think now you have to educate me on this, but my idea is that they were not specifically attracted to one gender over the other. They were attracted to a magnificent, magnetic person. And it did not matter to them if that person was represented as a male or a female. It was the person as the entirety of them that was attractive.
yeah, the best way I could explain it is actually from a hilarious show called Schitt's Creek. Everyone should watch it. Okay. And one of the characters is pansexual, and he says that he likes wine, but he doesn't really care about the labels. He just likes wine. You're like, okay,
Aw.
yeah. So that's the best way to explain it. It does it under any gender identity, any sexuality. It's all for them, and that's great. You have so many, you have so many options now.
Well, Joey, thank you for saying that because in the UK in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, up until I don't think super, not super far away in our history, that it was illegal for gay men to be with other gay men. That was just a thing that
Hmm.
was heavily prosecuted. So I can see the utility of following social convention of like, hey, I need a husband, you need a wife. I think we should pull our resources together
Now
and do
that's a
this.
lavender
And
marriage.
everybody kind of do the thing that's going to make them most fulfilled. And Joey, it is curious to me when you said, this was something that was prevalent in the Bloomsbury Group. In my mind, as a person outside of that, I see it more as these are artists, these are creatives, these are people who say, we don't have to follow the social norms. That's not a requirement for us. We're not society's straight-laced people who said there's only one way to be. And that is why they could create these beautiful pieces of art and literature because they were not conforming to someone else's idea of how they should live their life. And I think that's really important. And I'm sure you're going to talk to us about their motto, right?
I don't know what that is. I don't
Uh,
know their
they
motto.
love arts for art's sake.
Oh, I didn't see anything about that.
That's what I read
Uh,
about the Bloomsbury book group
I'm
that
not saying
they
it's not true. I just
yeah, I don't think it's
I
a
don't know.
motto. I want everyone to have a motto. So I think it was more of they celebrated being artistic for the sake of art. They didn't need it to be acceptable by others, or they weren't trying to win any prizes with it. They're like, we are artists and we are living an artistic life in all the ways that we can express ourselves, including our relationships, our homes, our clothing, and what we actually produce as our work product.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be I'm not surprised if that is their motto or they're just maybe it's not their motto, but just
It's what we
something.
branded them as, right? We can always
Yeah.
repaint their history.
Yeah, because that's an aestheticism. That's aestheticism, which is hard to say. And that's very Oscar Wilde, who is obviously a gay man. I can't call every gay man a queen. Even though I almost came out of my mouth. He was a gay. Oscar Wilde was obviously gay. He was extremely gay. Thank God for that. And yeah, he definitely taught about aestheticism and did lectures and stuff. And so I'm not surprised. But I think there's again, I want to talk about stream of consciousness after this, but not to harp on the queerness of the Bloomsbury group. But there is this tradition for queer people to have found family. So it makes a lot of sense that these sort of maybe not random people, they all were, you know, rubbing shoulders or elbows, whatever the hell that's called. What is it called? Rubbing shoulders?
Rubbing elbows with each other.
Rubbing.
Joey, no
Do what you
rubbing is
want.
happening.
Do
No.
what you want. Rub what you want. Rubbing elbows with each other somewhere. But yeah, it makes sense that this group of queer people, whatever part of the spectrum they're on, all found each other and came together to ultimately make art and give themselves the safety and the comfort in order to create all of these wonderful works of art. I don't know about the art of Vanessa Bell or any of the other artists, so that's something that I'm curious to look up now, but definitely Virginia Woolf and E.M. Forster, two authors that I love. I've loved E.M. Forster for a very long time now. So go ahead, Queens.
I love it,
I'm
Joey. And
saying
you're like,
anyway.
and now we're going to talk about stream of consciousness, which is where I live
Yeah.
my life, right? Everything is associated with everything else. So thank you for reining us in and putting us back on track.
Okay, so let me first just define stream of consciousness. So, it is defined as a narrative mode or method in literature that attempts to depict the natural flow of a character's extended thought process. It is a style of writing that tries to capture the natural flow of the character's thoughts by incorporating sensory impressions, incomplete ideas, unusual syntax, and rough grammar. The technique is intended to render the flow of of myriad impressions that impinge on the consciousness of an individual and form part of its awareness of their awareness along with the trend of their rational thoughts. They put his, but men are not the only ones. And obviously Virginia Woolf is most famous for really killing it with stream of consciousness. She definitely honed that craft. I think she's usually the one who is, I guess between her, James Joyce, and Proust, Marcel Proust, they are the three that are kind of, maybe not Marcel Proust. I don't know. I've actually never read any of his stuff, so I can't say that. But
Me
James
neither,
Joyce.
Joey. Yeah.
Okay, well, we're in the same boat. Although I bought the first book in that long series
Yeah,
that he
like our
wrote.
friends have all read it. I don't think that counts.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
Yeah, that it doesn't count because I've never read it. I've read like the first page of Swan's Way or whatever it's called. But anyway, that's my plan is to read Marcel Proust because he obviously gets talked about literally nonstop in those circles. So it's like, well, what do you mean? Anyway, so yes, Virginia Woolf is definitely super famous for her stream of conscious writing, which is prevalent in all of the work that I've read so far from her. It's definitely, and she just loves doing it.
Joey, can I say one more thing about Bloomsbury Group before we completely pivot away from that? I think
Hmm.
they were all artists, and I say that like writers or painters or whatever medium they were working in their own right. The fact that they happened to band together, I think, was also useful, how they influenced each other. And I think one of the things that I had heard about the Bloomsbury Group is that they were so open to experimentation and there was a lot of freedom. And I think Virginia Woolf was experimenting with modernism. She was a pioneer. She was like, "Hey, I'm going to try this out and see how it goes. There's not a lot of other people putting their work out in the way that I am." And I know that when I encountered Orlando for the first time, I read it the day before I went to see a stage production of the book that had been transferred to the stage. And I was like, wait a minute, what? This is a story about a transgendered person who like flows between genders and can have this amazing life. My mind was blown. I'm like, wait, how could that have happened in the 30s? Like that doesn't seem like that is a thing that would be available to anyone. And she's like, why not? Boys can be girls, girls can be boys. If you want to jump on a ship and sail away and find your fortune or become a princess, you go do all those things. And I just thought that was really interesting. But the reason I bring that up is that I think there was so much intellectual freedom and curiosity to be like, hey, if that's the book you're writing, go for it. There were not a lot of lockdowns or like, no, we're a certain kind of group and you have to stick within these boundaries. It's like our boundaries are that we have very fluid boundaries because we want people to really just, to really disclose who they are and find out who they are in the world that we're all inhabiting in. And so I'm very inspired by my idealism about what the group was like. I don't know if such a diverse group of people, if it was all sunshine and rainbows like I'm trying to paint it, or if there was any discord. But in my Jennifer view, they definitely were all supportive and encouraging and kind of feeding off of each other's energy to do their own thing.
Well, I'm not an expert, obviously, in the Bloomsbury Group, but I did watch a lecture by someone that was an expert, and it did seem like because there was, Virginia Woolf was part of the like original Bloomsbury Group, and then there were younger people coming in, and I think there was some tension that eventually did arise in them because they might have had some conflicting views. But I'll link that video. It's really informative. And this professor, or whatever her name is Nino something. I can't remember her last name. I mean, wrote a book about it. So I'm sure it's a fascinating book. If you want to learn more, you should listen to her because I don't know. She's an expert on the Bloomsbury Group. I think probably people are intimidated a little bit because of Virginia Woolf's writing style because we were just talking about stream of consciousness as you could not avoid talking about that if you're talking about Virginia Woolf. It can be pretty disorienting, especially because you were just talking about Orlando. So I think that's a good starter one actually because that was the one that I was like, oh, I really like this even though I didn't like Virginia Woolf at the time.
Disagree. Disagree,
No,
Joey. Yeah.
no.
We
Why? You're
started
gonna say
on
Mrs.
opposite.
Dalloway.
I am going
No.
to say Mrs. Dalloway, and you're like, no,
No.
absolutely not.
Yeah, I don't agree. But you know what? Try both and see if you've never read Virginia Woolf, try one and then the other and see which ones you like. I read Virginia.
Joey, sorry to interrupt you on
Hmm.
this. They could also read Street Haunting, which is her short story that feels so, so, so like her. It is like an amalgamation of all of her books
Hmm.
in one
Yeah.
little spot. So I'm like, I'm going to
Yeah.
suggest we do that. And we did review that, I think, back in December. So check it out.
Can't remember. But yes, probably yeah, definitely start with a short story. She doesn't have like a huge backlog or backlist of short stories. I have her collected short stories. So there's not that many, but definitely this is quality over quantity. Like she didn't write a ton more than, like Jane Austen. Jane Austen only was only able to write 6 books. they're all amazing, obviously. And some incompleted ones, but whatever. We're not here to talk about Jane Austen. I would say, okay, start with a short story, but I really benefit a lot from either reading her work out loud to myself, which I love doing because I'll do this one in a British accent, obviously, and or I will listen to the audiobook as I'm reading because I read The Waves. As I said, we're going to be reviewing The Waves. I read it just like in my head and not out loud when I first read it. And I wasn't, it's confusing, but only because, like, I knew I was getting into. I couldn't really discern reading it silently to myself when the characters were speaking and when they were thinking because they only are referred to as like Jenny said, Susan said, Rhoda said. Okay, those are the three girls there in it. So it doesn't matter if they're thinking or saying it out loud. Virginia Woolf is not telling us. So it really helps either listening to it on the audiobook or reading it because I am rereading it in anticipation for our podcast and I'm listening to an audiobook. I don't remember the audiobook narrator's name, but she's really good at it. And all as I'm rereading it, I'm like, oh, this feels now it's obvious. Now I get they're having a conversation amongst each other, and I can tell now when they're flipping into their head. So it really benefits, at least for me. Maybe I'm just an idiot and I just like couldn't figure it out. But
I doubt that's true, Joey. And I love that you bring that up because it's not quote unquote cheating to listen to the audiobook. It's actually enhancing your understanding of what she put together. So I'm like, yeah,
mhm.
let's do that.
Audiobooks are a regular reading. Okay, I'm not an ableist. I'm not going to say people have to only physically read if especially if they cannot, then you cannot. And but you should still enjoy reading. But anyway, yeah, definitely read it. And her language is so poetic that again, Borges would say this too, okay, that you should definitely read it out loud. This kind of writing is definitely meant to be read out loud, in my opinion.
Yeah, I will have to agree with you, Joey. I'm so looking forward to that.
I do want to talk about one concept that I didn't know this was something that Virginia Woolf was sort of might be writing about a lot throughout her works is this idea of the moments of being. Have you heard about that? It's a short
Mm-mm.
story that she wrote as well, and I believe it's her a nonfiction collection of like random pieces of nonfiction that's were collected, and it's called Moments of Being. But it really reminds me of the Flannery O'Connor's Moments of Grace when they have in the A Good Man's Hard to Find. You just let me drown there. Okay.
It was coming up. I'm like, it's called The Misfit in my mind. Like, that's
No,
not the
yeah.
name of the
That'd
story.
be a
Yes.
good name for the story. But anyway, A Good Man's Hard to Find. A better title, sure, Flannery O'Connor, okay. Where some of those characters have moments of grace where they have a come to Jesus moment, basically. But anyway, Virginia Woolf does not have that. She has moments of being, which she basically was trying to say that these are vivid flashes when life pierces through the haze of habit or non-being. So like when we're not actively participating in our lives, I guess. I'm not an expert in this. Okay. But I'm gonna definitely read more of her nonfiction work in that collection to explore this idea. But for right now, my thinking is that like when we're living sort of like on autopilot and sort of doing daily routines, that's sort of our non-being. And so we have to be like actively living, and that's our moments of being. And that's something that I want to talk about in The Waves because it comes up in that as well as androgyny, and oddly enough I feel like I did not see it, and then I was reading some literary critiques on it. I was like, oh, that's very interesting because obviously Orlando very androgynous.
I am so looking forward to that, Joey. So I have just started my journey into the waves, and it is fascinating. And everything that you said about these moments of being, I conceptually can see what you're talking about. And I think that Virginia Woolf gives us these, I want to call them like a lightning bolt moment. It's not a literal lightning bolt, but you are like,
Mm,
she is giving you the color of the grass as the waves of air are blowing over it. You see the butterfly, you see the woman's ring, like all of these. It's just like every sensation you can have, she threw it in one paragraph. So for me, it is that hyper awareness of being alive in that moment and all of the things that could be happening. And I think that is what is in some ways so electrifying about her writing. But I do have friends who are not on Team Virginia Woolf. They are like,
Hmm.
it's just too much. Like, just do the one thing. It's like, well, no, it's life. Life is all the things all the time if you are open to it. And so that is just a little asterisk to the side of like, it's gonna be intense and it may be sort of in my mind, kind of like a form of meditation where you are not judging what's happening around you. You're just seeing it all with this fresh perspective, and it can be quite beautiful, even in its simplicity of like, oh, wow, everything is everything.
That's a Lauryn Hill song.
And
um,
Joey, I don't know. I'll find out.
Lauryn Hill? You don't know who Lauryn Hill
I
is?
mean, I've heard of
From the
her. She had one of
Fugees?
the like the most popular, like The Education of Lauryn Hill was like one of the most
The
popular.
Miseducation.
Oh, see, this is where I'm at. I'm like, I read it on a list and was like, why do I not know this? I think
That was her
somehow
one solo album, and it literally is so good. Anyway, we're not, and she's from New Jersey. Aha, look at
there you
that.
go.
So obviously it was going to be great. So is Whitney Houston, just saying. So is Meryl Streep, just saying. We got a lot of famous, really talented people coming out of New Jersey. Yeah, I think that what you're saying about her writing and sort of everything is everything, a la Lauryn Hill, that it can be very overwhelming to read her because it's sort of like a sensory overload at times where you're like, oh my God, so much is happening, but like we didn't go anywhere. Like this story has literally no plot.
We're
And so
still
if you're,
sitting on the picnic blanket. Nothing has happened.
yeah, like the waves, every chapter or section, because they're not really chapters, starts with we're basically watching the sunrise and over the ocean kind of thing. And so it's reflective of like what's going on with the characters' lives or whatever. Not to spoil it. It's not a spoiler because you can't really spoil this book. Although I think the last chapter, that's why I didn't tell you like what it was about because I feel like it's not a spoiler because we're not really working up to anything other than obviously like the rest of their lives. We're just following six people's lives, or seven people, I should say, because you can't forget about Percival there. But yeah, it can be very overwhelming. So definitely, it's not there. Her books are not really something that you want to speed read or just like spend a lot of time reading at one time. It's sort of like whiskey or bourbon, even though I don't drink either of those things. Like you don't or okay, wine. Like a nice wine. You don't chug wine. Okay. You're not playing beer pong with wine.
And Joey, I
You're
love that you said
enjoying
that
it.
because you're taking a sip and you're just
Hmm.
letting it percolate through you and say, like, okay, I think I'm going to set this down and I'm going to read this book again tomorrow. And I think that is amazing advice because if you're like, oh, you need to read this 300-page book by tomorrow, do not do it, people. It is, you are going to walk away a big hater of this person because you are going to have an emotional hangover by all of the things that are dropped in your lap if you sit and read 300 pages in a day.
Although I have done that. And I didn't hate the experience. I really liked it. I think I just read Mrs. Dalloway in like one sitting because it's pretty short. But you know what? I'm gonna rescind my recommendation for where to start. Start with A Room of One's Own because it's nonfiction and it's very easy to follow, but it's beautifully written and like the all the themes and all of the topics that she's trying to discuss are so relevant to today that it's like, Girl, did you just write this?" And it's
Yeah,
really fascinating.
100
It's
years
really short.
ago. I just wrote it
Yeah.
like almost 100 years ago.
Yeah.
At
And
least
it's only,
80. Yeah.
yeah, I can't do math, but it's really short. It's like a little, it's maybe like 114 pages. I guess depends on the copy that you have. But that's my recommendation, and I stand by that.
Awesome, Joey. And okay, so A Room of One's Own, right? That's what you just told me, was in
Mm,
1929. So I wasn't so far off thinking it's almost 100 years old in
pretty
2025.
close.
So
Yeah.
yeah, we're getting better with our math. And Joey, just as a reminder, why are we having this conversation, right? And I think the reason that we are so excited to talk about Virginia Woolf is that we both have a personal history with her reading and how that has affected us. And because we keep coming back to her as a topic, we're like, we need to dive a little bit deeper because every time we talk about her or anyone adjacent to her, we veer off course for like a half an hour. And you're like, wait, we should be talking about. I'm like, no, we have to talk deeper we have to explore deeper the influence, the ripple in the literary pond of Virginia Woolf. And I think when we look at these short story writers that we have been exploring in the more contemporary sense, I think a lot of them will say Virginia Woolf was a inspiration for my writing. I think it would be very hard to become a writer today without having been exposed to her writing, either in a reactionary way of like, oh, I don't want that. Like, hey, I want to be Ernest Hemingway. I want to be
Yeah, the
straightforward. I want to be
opposite.
so straightforward and leave everything out. Or I want to be Virginia Woolf, who's like, I thought of a butterfly, and then I thought of a caterpillar, and then I thought of tea, and then I had a cigarette. Like, whatever that is going to be. Like, okay,
Yeah.
all of those things were legitimately and equally eloquently put on display.
And if you don't like Virginia Woolf, you know what? That's okay. You don't have to read her. But you should read her friend, E.M. Forster, because if you're like, I just want to read a story, oh my God, from start to finish, and I want to know what's going on, just read E.M. Forster because you're gonna know. He's very easy to read, but he's an amazing writer, which we should read more of E.M. Forster. We've only read that one, that one like sci-fi one. I don't even think that's his best thing.
We have lots to look forward to, Joey, and I would like to wrap up our conversation since we are talking about Ian Forster with the note he wrote to Leonard after Virginia's passing. Dear Leonard, I have just seen the Times, feel a bit trembly and unable to think of anyone but myself. I will write to you again. As I dare say you know, she had invited me to come, and I had suggested doing so later in this month. I am just going to Cambridge. Dear Leonard, it will seem empty and strange. I can't write any more now, only send my deepest love and sadness. Leslie Humphrey came over that very day, and we talked a great deal about Virginia. He will be desolated like so many of all generations. And the reason I wanted to leave us there is that in her life, she had such a profound impact on those around her of all generations. As you said, the Bloomsbury Group was growing and expanding, and new generations of writers were being influenced. But here we are, 100 years later, also generationally talking about how these concepts and these beautiful words affect us personally. So I just love the timeless nature of the beautiful gift of her life and the tragedy of her death.